Well, we continue this season of why bad things happen to good people with mentoring moments by talking about the fact that there are some things that happen in the world that are random. We've already mentioned that everybody experiences some bad and good. And Jesus even talked about that. The sun shines on the good and the bad. The rain falls on the good and the bad. We talked about the fact that sometimes there are consequences to our choices that God doesn't cause. And then there is the reality that sometimes there are things that happen in our world that are unexplainable. They're natural disasters. And people look at the natural disaster and go, well, why did God allow that? We've said, why do bad things happen to good people? But we could also say, why do good things happen to bad people? Why is it that someone inside of a natural disaster, one person might be spared, and then another person, might lose their life or have some kind of injury? Why did the tree fall on one house and not another house? This gets pretty deep at some point, doesn't it? And the idea is not that we can answer every question. In fact, I really encourage you not to try to do that. I think you sit with the person in the fact that we really don't know, that there are questions that maybe we'll never know the answer to in life. And be with them in that thought. Don't be quick to answer. Don't have an answer for every problem. But one of the things that we can talk about inside of a framework is that God does have to allow some random in life. And you might say to me, well, why? That doesn't necessarily make sense. Well, I talked about in the previous episode that it's important to God that we have the right to choose. That it's only by choosing we can volitionally love God, not because we have to, but because we want to. We're not a puppet on a string. We're not pre-programmed. We are created in the image of God with the right to choose. So that's a good thing, and God wanted to preserve that. To preserve that, he had to give some random. Think about this with me. This takes a little bit of thinking, but go with me down this path. So that if God would always reward people for doing good things, and he would always punish people for doing bad things, what would people do? They would do the good and avoid the evil if they wanted to get the reward or avoid the punishment. But does that mean that inside of their heart, they're doing it by their choice? See, in a sense, even though God didn't pre-program people, if he always rewarded the good and he always punished the evil, then people would probably do as much good as they could possibly do, and then as much evil as they could get away with in our sinful condition. But that doesn't mean that we would be any closer to God. In fact, we might be further from him, because essentially we would kind of be in control then, which I think is the basis for a lot of the religions in the world. You have man's way of trying to get to God, or you have some way of man still being in control, but asking God and wanting God to help, right? So you're tracking, I'm sure. So if God doesn't want to make it so that you sort of have to follow him, then what he does is he lets some random things happen in the world. So recently a hurricane tore through the Gulf states of the U.S., Helene, and did billions of dollars worth of damage. The last count I saw in loss of life was 160 people lost their lives. Whole towns destroyed. People's lives are changed forever. And it would be easy to say about that, well, why did God do that? Why did God allow that? Because God created weather systems in the world, because God created the world with principles that lets the earth operate pretty much as he set it up to operate. And then inside of that, we have free will. You can choose whether you want to live in one of the Gulf states or whether you want to live in the tornado alley where I live in Kansas. Or you can choose if you want to live along the coast, and then you can have problems there because there are earthquakes in California. You see what I mean? That God sets up a system, and inside of it, he gives us choices. Now, what I would say to everyone is, it isn't God's desire necessarily to deliver us from everything bad that happens in this world, but to be with us in it when it does, so that we can choose faith. One of the things that happens when you have bad things happen, but you still choose to exercise faith, your faith grows in that moment, and you can find God in the midst of trouble, which I would say might be one of the reasons he allows these difficult things. Like he put the world in motion, he gave us free choice. Inside of that choice, he gave us random, so we're not pre-programmed, but then it's up to us to exercise faith. And you can either decide, I'm going to turn to God in this difficult time, or you can say, I'm going to turn away from him because I'm angry or because I'm mad or because I'm hurt or whatever else that's going on. I understand that choice. I've been there. But there's one choice that will give you help and strength during a time of trial and trouble. There's one choice that actually takes you further away. So I'm going to encourage you to accept the fact that there's random in the world, accept the fact that there is a world beyond this world where everything is right, but that's not today. And while we're here, I truly believe God can redeem the most painful, hurtful, challenging things if we'll let him, and that's our choice. I invite you to let him redeem your most painful, difficult, confusing things in life. And then out of that, you'll have a story to help others when they go through difficult, painful, confusing things in life.